Today is 31st August 2022 and I am Ravi Sharma giving a very brief presentation and talk on return of humans to moon after 55 years. So we will talk today on journey for 55 years nearly that humans took to return to the moon. They started this journey with Apollo 8 and Artemis 2 will be the next time you will see humans in a similar way to Apollo 8 that the three astronauts went in 1968 in December. My details are given below for contact. Orman, Lowell and Anders were three astronauts on Apollo 8. Our story is all about figure of 8. We will only concentrate on those missions which made a figure of 8 around the moon, between Earth and the moon, as shown in the next slide. So, when they were behind the moon coming to the Earth side, they took a view of the Earth, the first view taken by humans of Earth, how Earth looks from space. So here you see the Earth view of Apollo 8. I happen to write a short story about it for a newspaper in Hindi in 1968 where I sketched the crawler that is still being used for Artemis, which is at the bottom, and S1, S2 and S4B, three stages of the Saturn V rocket, which took humans to space, to moon. And the command and service module are shown here in this triangle. And there is a space for future lunar lander from Apollo 9 missions onwards, which will be filled with the actual lunar lander flight hardware. These were some of the observatories around the globe that took typical pictures sequence like this of about 10 pictures where they show the dumps from the spacecraft or the rocket and how these dumps progress in space, whether it is oxygen, hydrogen, or water dump in space. This is a paper I published with my colleagues. The oxygen cloud is like a fan, the hydrogen cloud is like a butterfly, and the command and service module is shown as a dot. This picture is taken several thousand, I would say about 50,000 miles away from Earth on the way to the moon. This is the article I wrote. This figure of 8 is important. First you go around the Earth and then you go in a transfer lunar orbit which takes you there. Then either you go around the moon once or twice or you just sling back and come back to Earth and land like this. So there is a point to escape. You need 7 miles per second or 25,000 miles per hour speed to escape. But suppose we could bring here the speed to zero, theoretically. That would be called a Lagrange point. Something very similar between the Earth and the Sun that the James Webb telescope is brought to stationary speed. But since we want to reach the moon, we don't do that. We actually give it a boost, a kick from Earth to go towards the moon. Apollo 9 did not orbit the moon. It just orbited the Earth at different heights, altitudes, and checked the docking of lunar module, checked the rendezvous, and also tested the lunar module engines and its reaction control systems that control its orientation. So Apollo 8 was figure of 8. Apollo 9 was not a figure of 8. Apollo 10 was another figure of 8. Apollo 10 was May 18th to 26th in 1969, approximately 2 months before the lunar landing. These were for lower lunar orbit tests of the command module on the right and of the lunar landing module that separated and carried out the various engine burns to make sure it is capable of landing on the moon's surface in the next mission, as well as of rendezvousing and joining the command module on the right around lunar orbit. You can see the moon in the background. So Apollo 8, Apollo 10 were figures of 8. They went in lunar orbit. Finally, on July 20th, human beings landed. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed, while Mike Collins was orbiting around in the command module. This was a historic landing, of course, modified figure of 8. It's more than figure of 8. It recovered the humans in the ocean. Apollo 12 had similar journey but longer duration, more tests, more proving of things to be done, longer duration experiments on the moon's surface and so on. But we had a tragedy of oxygen tank explosion, rupture in the fuel cell in the command module on Apollo 13. So Apollo 13 again became a figure of 8. This time the journey was almost 3/4 to the moon. Then the command module was egressed after lunar module docked with it, and the astronauts moved into lunar module because there is no atmosphere there, so the spacecraft was safe to move into, and then they fired its engines 2 times. So in a very complex orbit maneuver, not using the command module because it had depleted its fuel and fuel cell oxygen, they did not want to fire that. So they used the lunar module engines to re-enter the Earth. And during re-entry, when they came near the Earth, they came back for protection of the heat shield into command module, which is this pyramid-like structure here. In joint configuration, it looks like that. And then they fired, they allowed it to re-enter, and it burned. Its shield is supposed to normally burn and landed in ocean safely. This was a very eventful figure of 8. My contribution and my team's contributions were these. On Apollo 13, we captured, like the photos we showed you, we captured the oxygen release from command module when the spacecraft was in sunlight and the observatories on ground were in darkness, and published it. We had a planet-like dot which we followed during the entire journey of Apollo 13 for a few days and nights, because the observatories were 60 in number and were spread at different points on the Earth, like Brazil, like Nainital, India, like Spain, Madrid, and so on, including California and Australia. So they would keep pictures of the trajectory in the star field behind to locate in case communications were disrupted with the affected Apollo 13. Then we were also involved in tracking of the lunar module burning in Earth's atmosphere, because on the leg of the lunar module was mounted radioisotope generator, which re-entered with the lunar module. Fortunately, it was designed like a re-entry body, so it did not rupture, and it entered as a single piece and went in Pacific Ocean, Mariana Trench in deep Pacific. The other contribution we made was that I suggested a retrospective instrument covers for the service module bay. Remember, this is the service module SM on the left side here. So in the service module, we instituted instrument covers. They would be actuated with solenoids later, but while the pyrotechnic bay cover separated, all three astronauts were together, and this was a mission sequence change that I did, and I cost NASA $10 million per mission in those days for this small change, but it ensured safety of astronauts for future missions. Now we are going after 55 years with Artemis 1 back to space. Artemis 1 is a robotic mission where there will be no human beings, but the spacecraft would be human qualified, human flight qualified. Here are the sequences of where we start from the Earth. In the green portion of the orbit, we go up to 60-70 miles near the moon, and we get a kick, and then we circularize or elliptical orbit around 40,000 miles orbit around the moon to qualify human safety in future lunar space stations that will orbit around in these areas, and then from them will land the humans in space into lunar surface, most likely southern pole areas like Chandrayaan did, but hopefully safely. The blue orbit is the return path. Artemis is figure of 8, robotic, human-like, human qualification flight. Remember, the author here, I have worked on Apollo 8 to 17, bit on Apollo Soyuz docking, Skylab experiments, especially earth science and contamination experiments. I have been also a principal investigator on space shuttle planning mission, sortie mission for 30 days, and I have worked for several years designing the space station in the 70s. Of course, robotic missions are plenty. I have done them in NASA and also during a 5-year work period at ISRO as scientific secretary, as a person who also established National Remote Sensing Agency in India, including Earth Station and satellites. The 4 Artemis engines that we are showing are Space Launch System Artemis. 4 engines they have flown on 21 space shuttle missions. Remember, they were qualified for 100 missions per shuttle. And since we retired the shuttles in 2012 time frames, about 10 years ago, these engines were available, and these have been used for Artemis mission. So the commander name of this Munican, the robot, is Campos, because Campos was the engineer who brought Apollo 13 safely back, who suggested the complex duct tape based solution so that the astronauts could breathe and not be depleted of oxygen between the command module and the lunar module. And this will go 62 miles near lunar surface, 40,000 miles around moon, the various things would qualify the environment for humans. But Artemis 2, which will use similar engines, next mission will be figure of 8. Artemis time frame, one time frame is September 2022. The Artemis 2 would be a year or two later, but it will be with 4 humans, most likely in 2024. And Artemis 3 would again land like Apollo 11. So when Artemis goes, the components developed by Space Shuttle go in space. They do not come back like Space Shuttle because there is no stage recovery plan for the earlier missions of Artemis. But Artemis 2 and 3 and 4 will also use the 14 flight-proven RS-235 engines, and 2 new engines will be developed beyond the shuttle era. So my story is all about figure of 8, orbit around Earth and the Moon, and I thought I would share this story. This is Ravi Sharma. I'm closing with the prayer that our mind, which is moving faster than the speed of light, should always carry noble thoughts for humanity. Thank you.